What would you do if the seat you paid for your rightful place was taken from you? Not because of a mistake, but because someone decided you didn't belong there. For Maya Bennett, a poised black CEO and majority owner of one of the nation's largest airlines, that question wasn't hypothetical. It happened at 30,000 feet, in front of dozens of passengers, with cameras rolling and whispers spreading. One entitled passenger, one moment of prejudice, and one choice that would decide whether this would become another quiet injustice or the start of something far bigger. What happens when the very system you helped build turns against you? How do you fight for dignity without losing your composure? And how can a single act of resistance ripple across an entire industry today? You'll witness the moment a stolen seat became a catalyst for change, the confrontation, the fallout, and the decision that grounded more than just a flight. If you believe in fairness, if you believe no one should be told they don't belong, stay with us, like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss a single story that challenges the way we see justice in the everyday. Now, let's step onto the plane. The air inside the jet bridge was cool, but carried that faint metallic scent of recycled air and jet fuel. Passengers shuffled forward, the clack of roller bags echoing off the narrow walls. Somewhere up ahead, a child was laughing, and a flight attendant's polite voice floated back from the cabin. Maya Bennett stepped aboard Horizon Air Flight 451 from New York to Miami. She greeted the crew with a soft smile, her voice warm but reserved, and moved down the aisle toward business class. Her navy blazer fit her perfectly, the fabric catching the light each time she moved. A diamond wedding ring glimmered briefly as she adjusted the strap of her leather portfolio. Seat 3A. It was where she always sat on this monthly route. She liked the quiet near the front, the easy view of the galley, and the ability to step off quickly after landing. Sliding her portfolio under the seat in front, she settled in and pulled a copy of Forbes from her carry-on. The magazine cover featured an article on global investment trends. She had read most of it on the way to the airport, but enjoyed going through the finer details while waiting for takeoff. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Across the aisle, a man in 2C was talking loudly into his phone, discussing sales numbers as though the whole cabin needed to hear them. Maya tuned him out. She was thinking about the board meeting waiting for her in Miami, the acquisition talks that could shift her company's trajectory for the next decade. A shadow fell across her magazine. She looked up slowly. A man stood in the aisle, one hand gripping the top of the seat in front of her, the other holding a crumpled boarding pass. Mid-50s, maybe older. His polo shirt was wrinkled, the collar bent on one side. A thin layer of sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool air. His face was already red, and not from the temperature. "Excuse me," he said, planting his other hand firmly on the armrest beside her. "But I think you're in my seat." Maya kept her gaze steady, the kind of calm, unblinking look that unsettled people who expected immediate compliance. She turned one page of the magazine before answering. "This is 3A, she said evenly, without defensiveness, without apology. "Exactly," the man replied, holding up the boarding pass like a piece of evidence in court. "I paid extra for this seat months ago." She raised one eyebrow, just slightly. She didn't reach for her bag, didn't scramble to defend herself. She simply studied him for a beat longer before returning her eyes to the page. The diamond on her left hand caught the cabin light again. Down the row, a young woman looked up from her laptop. She was in 3B, her hair pulled back neatly, the glow of her screen reflecting off her glasses. Her name was Lena Park, and she had been deep into editing a business school presentation until the man's tone made her pause. Something about it was sharp. Edged. "No problem," the man said to Lena without glancing at her. "Just someone who doesn't understand airplane seating." Lena's hand slid toward her phone. She had seen this kind of situation before online, in viral clips that racked up millions of views in hours. One tap, and her camera was open. Another tap, and she was live, on social media. "I think there's been some confusion," the man continued, his voice rising a notch. "This lady seems to think she belongs in business class." The words carried just enough bite to make Lena's stomach twist. She watched Maya for a reaction. There was nothing, no change in posture, no flare of temper, just stillness. A silence so deliberate it felt like strategy. The boarding process continued around them. Passengers filed past with carry-ons and coats, stealing glances as they sensed the tension. Maya's eyes remained on her magazine, but the set of her jaw was different now. Controlled, contained. "Sir, is there a problem?" a voice asked from the aisle. Lena turned to see Patricia Lang, the gate agent, making her way forward. Patricia was a 20-year veteran of airport operations, her professional smile polished but weary. "This woman is clearly in the wrong seat," the man Robert Harlow said, pointing at Maya. "Can you please handle this?" Maya reached into her blazer pocket and produced her boarding pass. She handed it to Patricia without a word. Patricia glanced at it, her eyes scanning the printed details. "Ma'am, this shows seat 3A, Patricia said after a moment. There was a flicker of confusion in her voice, as though the paper in her hand had betrayed her expectation. "That's impossible," Robert snapped. "Let me see that." But Maya had already slipped the boarding pass back into her pocket. Lena's camera caught a glimpse of it, Platinum Elite printed in gold lettering across the top. "She probably upgraded at the last minute," Robert muttered, "or traded seats with someone." The cabin speakers crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief departure delay due to a seating issue," a flight attendant announced. Robert's expression brightened. "See, you're holding up the whole flight." Patricia's smile had tightened, her posture shifting into something more guarded. She knew how to deal with angry passengers. She had dealt with hundreds. But something about this scene felt different, less about logistics and more about perception. "Sir, I'll also need to see your boarding pass," Patricia said. Robert handed it over like a winning hand in a card game. 3A, paid for months ago. Patricia studied both records, her brow furrowing. "There seems to be a duplicate assignment. This happens sometimes with our system." "Then she needs to move," Robert said immediately. "I was here first." "Actually, sir," Lena said, her voice cutting through the hum of the cabin, "she was seated when I boarded. And I've been here for at least 20 minutes. Robert turned his head toward Lena, his smile thin. "I don't care how long she's been sitting there. That's my seat." The aisle behind him was clogged now with curious passengers craning to see what was happening. Phones appeared in more hands. The tension felt heavy, pressing into the walls of the aircraft. Maya turned another page. The print was crisp under her fingertips, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the eyes on her, the calculations being made about who she was and why she was here. She'd lived this moment in other forms before, in conference rooms, in negotiations, in places where power was decided before a word was spoken. And here it was again, at 30,000 feet minus the altitude. She said nothing. Not yet. The air in business class had shifted. It was no longer just the quiet hum of an aircraft boarding. It was thicker now, alive with the weight of something everyone could feel, but no one wanted to name out loud. Robert Harlow still stood beside Maya Bennett's seat, one hand gripping the overhead bin, the other pointing toward her like an accusation. He had not moved an inch, and neither had she, Maya Bennett. Patricia Lang read again from the boarding list on her tablet, her voice flat but uncertain. She glanced at Robert's boarding pass. "Sir, your ticket does say 3A, but so does hers. This must be a system error." Robert leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough that only a few nearby passengers could hear. "Or maybe it's not an error. Maybe someone is trying to sneak into a seat they didn't pay for." Lena Park's livestream camera caught that line perfectly. She was careful not to draw attention to herself, but her viewers were already reacting. Comments flashed across her screen. "That's messed up. Racist vibes all over this. She hasn't even spoken yet, and he's acting like that." Maya's eyes stayed on her magazine, though she had not read a single word since Robert's arrival. Inside, her thoughts were a calm but firm current. She had been here before, not on this exact flight, but in this exact position. The position where someone else decided what she deserved before knowing a single fact about her. Patricia sighed. "Sir, if you could just step aside for a moment. We can get this cleared up with the captain." "I'm not stepping anywhere," Robert shot back. "I booked this months ago. I planned my connection. I have meetings in Miami I can't miss." His voice was loud enough for the entire section to hear now. "Some people don't understand that time is money." He let the words hang there. Lena caught the quick look Robert gave Maya, as if to say, "And you're not one of those people who understand." Patricia glanced at Maya again. "Ma'am, would you be willing to move to another seat just until we can sort this out?" Maya looked up for the first time in several minutes. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "No," she said quietly. The single word carried more weight than the argument Robert had been making for 5 minutes. A few passengers turned their heads, curious about the woman who was refusing to yield. Robert's jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know where you got that outfit or that magazine." "But you clearly don't, sir," Patricia interrupted, a hint of nervousness now in her tone. "Please keep your voice down." But Robert was not interested in lowering his voice. "This is exactly why flights get delayed. People like this taking seats they didn't pay for. From 3B, Lena spoke up. "She was here before you boarded. I've been sitting next to her the whole time." Robert turned toward Lena. "And who asked you? This doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone in this cabin," Lena replied without missing a beat. "Especially when you're raising your voice at a woman who hasn't even argued with you." Maya's fingers rested lightly on the edge of her portfolio. She considered speaking, but decided against it. Not yet. Her silence was not surrender. It was a calculation. The captain's voice crackled over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Joel Ramirez. We are experiencing a brief delay due to a seating issue. We appreciate your patience." Robert smiled, leaning just slightly toward Maya. "Hear that? Even the captain knows this is holding up everyone." More phones were out now. 2 passengers in the row behind were openly recording. The man in 4C muttered to his seatmate, "I've seen this before. Someone gets an upgrade they shouldn't have and refuses to move." Patricia shifted uneasily. "I'll have to call the captain up here," she said. "Do it," Robert replied immediately. "Maybe he'll finally clear this up." Lena's live stream viewer count climbed past 400. Comments poured in. "That guy is unbelievable. She's so calm. Respect. Name and shame him." The moments between Patricia's call and the captain's arrival stretched long. Maya turned another page in her magazine. her posture unchanged. But inside, her thoughts were sharp. She knew she could end this in 30 seconds by showing what was in her portfolio. She also knew that doing it too soon would let them walk away, thinking it was her title, not her humanity, that had earned her respect. When Captain Joel Ramirez appeared, his expression was already tinged with irritation. He hated delays. His eyes went first to Robert Tall, red-faced, agitated, and then to Maya seated, composed, black. His voice was measured, but carried the undertone of a man who thought he already understood the problem. "What's going on here?" Joel asked Patricia. "Duplicate boarding assignment for seat 3A. Patricia explained. "Mr. Harlow insists it's his. Ms. Bennett's pass also shows 3A. Joel looked at Maya. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to either move to your assigned seat or step off the aircraft so we can sort this out." Robert's smirk widened. "I am in my assigned seat," Maya replied softly. "Ma'am, please," Joel said, his patience thinning. "We can take care of this at the gate. But right now, you're holding up the departure." Lena spoke up again. "She's been sitting here quietly the whole time. He's the one causing the scene." "This doesn't involve you," Robert snapped. "It does when you're harassing someone," Lena countered, her camera still trained on the scene. "And about 1,000 people watching this live would agree with me." Joel frowned. "Miss, please stop recording." "No," Lena said simply. "This is public enough already." Maya looked at Robert, then back to Joel. Her voice was calm, her tone almost conversational. "You're asking me to leave my seat, the seat I paid for, because he says it's his." Joel straightened slightly. "I'm asking you to cooperate so we can keep the flight on schedule." Robert jumped in. "She doesn't belong here. This is business class. I've been more than patient." The words were like a spark hitting dry grass. Passengers shifted in their seats. A few gasped quietly. Lena's viewer count leapt to over 800. Comments flew. "There it is." He said it out loud. "This is textbook bias." Maya placed her magazine on the armrest. Her fingers were steady, but inside her pulse had quickened. She had felt this moment building since he first spoke to her, the moment when the mask slipped and the truth spilled out. She didn't speak. Not yet. But she was done turning pages in her magazine. The plane was still boarding, but the rhythm had broken. What had been a steady shuffle of passengers and carry-ons became a slow-moving knot in the aisle around row 3. People paused to look. Some tried to pretend they were not looking. The hum of the vents continued like a soft mechanical breath. Patricia Lang pressed 2 fingers to the earpiece she wore and spoke quietly into it. Her smile had thinned. She glanced between Robert Harlow and Maya Bennett as if trying to balance a set of scales that did not want to even out. "Sir, please step back so we can let other passengers pass," Patricia said. Robert did not move. He tilted the crumpled boarding pass so that it almost touched Maya's shoulder. "I told you. 3A. My seat." Lena Park shifted in 3B to give the aisle a little more space. Her phone was steady in her hand. The comments flew so fast she could not read them all. Viewers were tagging friends. Viewers were saying they had seen this before. Viewers were asking for names. Maya closed her magazine and set it on the armrest. The cover caught a slice of light from the window. She felt her own heartbeat slow to a deliberate pace. She breathed in the cool air and the faint mixture of coffee and citrus cleaner that always lived in the cabin. She did not look at Robert. She looked at Patricia instead. "I am seated in 3A, Maya said. "My boarding pass reflects that." Patricia cleared her throat. "Ma'am, there is a duplicate assignment in the system. It happens sometimes. If you would not mind moving for just a moment." I can resolve this at the gate. To where exactly? Maya asked. We have a very comfortable seat in economy available, Patricia said. Only for a moment while we sort it out. Only for a moment. The words landed soft, but carried weight. Maya let them sit between them. She thought about a different airport years ago, a security line, a man who asked who she was traveling with and then waved the people behind her forward when she said she was alone. That had been a moment, too. Only a moment. The kind that stacks up over time into a wall you must climb every day. Across the aisle. The man in 2C covered his phone's microphone with his palm and leaned toward his seatmate. Happens all the time, he said. Someone tries to sit up here and hopes no one will make a fuss. Lena turned her camera enough to catch his face. He pulled back when he realized he was on video. He looked away and pretended to scroll emails. Maya spoke softly. I will not move to economy. I am seated in my assigned seat. Robert laughed. There it is. The entitlement. This is business class, lady. You cannot just walk up here and take what you want. A passenger in row 4 shook his head. Another whispered to a companion. A woman in row 2 pressed her lips together like she was holding in a comment that might burn on the way out. Patricia held up both hands. Please, everyone, keep your voices down. We will get this fixed. Sir, I am asking you again to step back and let the crew work. Robert pointed at the galley. Where is the captain? Let him handle it. He is on his way, Patricia said. The speaker above them popped with a short burst of static. Ladies and gentlemen, boarding is still in progress. We appreciate your patience. We will depart shortly after we resolve a seat assignment issue. Shortly. Another soft word that stretched time, Lena whispered without taking her eyes off the screen. Viewers at 900 and climbing. People are screen recording. People are sending this to news accounts. Robert rolled his shoulders as if warming up for a sport. He looked down at Maya again. You heard them. You are delaying the flight. You are making a scene. Maya held his gaze now. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet study of the man in front of her. You are the one standing in the aisle and speaking loudly, she said. He smirked. I am speaking loudly because I am right. Patricia stepped between them, a careful half-step that put her back to Maya and her open palm toward Robert. Sir, please. Maya watched that small detail. Patricia's body facing Robert. Patricia's back turned to her. It was a practical move. It also said more than Patricia likely intended. You handle the problem in front of you, and the quiet person becomes the background. It was not always personal. That was what made it so hard to name. A flight attendant with a neat bun and a composed face squeezed past with a tray of water bottles. Would anyone like some water while we wait? She asked. No one took one. Lena spoke to her phone in a low voice. For the record, the woman in 3A has shown her pass. The gate agent confirmed it said 3A. The man also has 3A. The system has a duplicate. But the gate agent asked the woman to move to economy first, not the man. The comments came in waves. Some were angry, some were pleading, some were tired, like people who had watched this exact story too many times. Maya's fingers rested on the edge of her leather portfolio. She felt the weight of the documents inside. Letters on letterhead, minutes of meetings, names and signatures. One sheet of paper could change the temperature of the cabin in a breath. She knew that. She also knew that if she used it now, the lesson people would learn was a smaller one. Respect the title. Respect the money. She wanted them to learn a different lesson first. Respect the person. An older woman in 5A raised her voice just enough. "Excuse me. I have a connection. Can we please get moving?" Robert seized it. "You hear that? You are costing people time. Move to the back and let the grown-ups get to work." The words hit the row like a slap. Someone hissed, a sound like steam escaping. The flight attendant with the water tray froze for a second, then continued forward. Patricia looked stricken. "Sir, that is not appropriate." He shrugged. "It is accurate." The aisle opened for a moment as a late boarding couple slid into row 6. The woman glanced at Maya, then at Robert, then down at her own hands, as if the safest place for her eyes was anywhere that could not look back. The captain appeared at last. Joel Ramirez was a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut and the worn calm of someone who had flown through real storms. He surveyed the scene with a pilot's quick scan, the man standing, the woman seated, the gate agent between them, the phones. Always the phones now. "What do we have?" Joel asked. Patricia repeated the facts. "Duplicate assignment for 3A. Both passengers have boarding passes. The system shows both as valid." Joel nodded once. He turned to Maya. "Ma'am, I need you to cooperate so we can keep the departure on schedule. We will resolve this at the gate." Maya looked up at him. Her voice did not rise. "I am in my assigned seat." Joel's jaw flexed. He did not raise his voice either. "Ma'am, I am asking you to stand and step off for a moment so we can move the flight forward." Robert allowed himself a small victorious inhale. Lena's voice was steady. "She has been quiet. She has not raised her voice." "He has." "You are asking the quiet one to move." Joel looked toward Lena for the first time. "Miss, please stop recording." Lena did not blink. "No." The man in 2C chuckled once. "Bold move." Joel returned his attention to Patricia. "Get operations to print a new pass for one of them. Move her to a different seat for now." Patricia hesitated. "We do not have another business seat." "Then move her to the next available seat," Joel said. Maya held the captain's eyes. "The next available seat is in economy." Joel did not answer that directly. He indicated the aisle. "Please stand." There was a kind of silence that followed. Not the ordinary quiet of a plane. A careful silence. The kind that says everyone is listening for the next sentence because they will remember it later. Maya's hand tightened around the armrest for a breath. She felt the smooth curve of it under her palm. She felt the steadiness of her own spine. She felt the urge to end the game quickly. She let the urge pass. "No," she said. The word did not fill the cabin. It did not need to. It was clear enough. Joel exhaled. "Ma'am, if you do not comply, I will have to involve security, and we will have to remove you from the aircraft." Robert looked triumphant. Finally. Lena's view count touched a number that made her throat tighten. She did not say the number aloud. She felt the attention from beyond the cabin, like heat on her skin. Maya looked at Patricia. She looked at Joel. She looked at Robert last. She let herself feel what was sitting behind her collarbone, a mix of sadness and resolve, the ache of a familiar crossroads. She thought of the junior analyst she had once mentored, who had cried in a stairwell after a meeting in which 3 people forgot her name and one called her the wrong one twice. "You keep teaching the room how to treat you," Maya had told her then. "Sometimes that means you speak. Sometimes it means you do not move." Maya reached down and slid her portfolio a half-inch farther under the seat. She was not going to pick it up yet. She was not going to show anyone what was inside. Not until they told her who they were without knowing who she was. Joel lifted his hand toward the forward galley. I am calling security." A murmur moved down the rows like wind over tall grass. A few passengers looked alarmed. A few looked satisfied. Most looked away. Maya folded her hands over the closed magazine and waited. The plane kept breathing its cool, artificial air. The boarding door was still open. Somewhere in the jet bridge, a ramp agent laughed at a private joke, the sound small and distant. In 3B, Lena swallowed and steadied her grip. The red light on her screen glowed. Live. The moment stretched, and then began to tilt. Captain Joel Ramirez kept his stance in the narrow aisle, his shoulders squared, his face a picture of professional patience with a crack or two showing underneath. The low rumble of the engines on standby was the only steady sound in the cabin now. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering to one another, trying not to be obvious. Phones were raised just high enough to catch the scene without drawing attention. Lena Park's phone wasn't hidden at all. She held it like a shield. Her viewers climbing past 1,200. The stream of comments was relentless. This is bias in real time. He's siding with the loud guy. Watch her face. She hasn't even raised her voice once. Maya Bennett sat unmoving, her back straight, her hands folded neatly over her magazine. She wasn't performing calmness for the cabin. She was inhabiting it, every breath slow, every blink deliberate. "Ma'am," Joel said, using that careful tone that sounds polite, but is built to leave no room for disagreement. "If you refuse to move, we can't push back from the gate. The rest of the passengers have connections. We have a schedule to meet." Robert Harlow jumped in before Maya could respond. "Exactly. I've been telling her that. This is costing all of us time. She was here first," Lena said from 3B. "I watched her sit down. She's not the one causing the holdup." "This doesn't involve you," Robert snapped. "It does when you're making comments about who belongs here." Lena shot back. A ripple of energy moved through the rows. Several passengers looked away, not wanting to be caught on either side. Others kept their cameras steady, sensing something important was happening. Maya's gaze moved from Robert to Joel. She studied the captain's face, the way his jaw clenched each time Robert spoke, the subtle glance he gave Robert when he used words like schedule and connections. It wasn't overt malice. It was the quiet, habitual deference to the person who was already loud. Inside, her mind weighed options. She could produce the folder in her portfolio now and end this. She could have them both scrambling to apologize within 30 seconds. But if she did, the crew and passengers would walk away, believing it was her status that mattered, not the injustice they had just participated in. Robert leaned closer, his voice dropping just enough that the microphones on the live stream barely caught it. "Some people just don't know their place." It was quick, a flash of a sentence, but it hit Maya's ears with a familiar weight, a dull echo from boardrooms and dinners and unspoken conversations where she had been tolerated, not welcomed. Lena's camera caught it. Comments exploded. "There it is. Wow." He said it out loud. "This is why you record everything." Maya didn't flinch, but she felt the line land like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread across the cabin. A woman in 2D glanced at Robert sharply. A man in 5C shook his head. Patricia Lang, still standing in the aisle, tried to regain control. "Sir, please, that's not appropriate." Robert threw his hands out slightly. "It's the truth. I paid for this seat. I've been patient. I have an important meeting in Miami. I can't miss it because he cut himself off." But the implication was loud enough to be heard. Maya kept her voice low and even. "You don't know who I am." Robert laughed under his breath. "And I don't need to. You're in my seat. Joel stepped in again, clearly eager to move the situation forward. "Ms. Bennett, I'm asking one last time. Please step out of the seat so we can sort this out." Maya's eyes held his for a moment longer. She let the silence stretch. She wanted him to hear it, the pause, the weight of what was unspoken. Then she said, "No." The air seemed to tighten. Robert scoffed. "You can't just sit there and refuse. That's not how this works." "That is exactly how this works," Maya said, her tone still soft. "I am sitting in the seat assigned to me." From the back of the cabin came a new voice. "Let her stay. This is ridiculous." A man in economy called forward. The flight attendants glanced down the aisle, startled by the open support. Joel's voice dropped into that captain's register, meant to signal finality. "Security is on the way." Lena panned her camera to catch his face. "You're calling security on the person who's been sitting quietly for the last 20 minutes." Joel didn't respond. Robert smiled like a man convinced the verdict was his. He turned to the cabin as though to collect silent agreement. "Finally, we can move on." Maya watched him, noting the way he straightened his shoulders, the slight flush that came not from embarrassment, but from victory. She wondered how many times this man had walked away from similar moments certain he was right, certain his voice, his confidence, his insistence were proof of his correctness. The minutes stretched. Outside the plane, a ramp agent appeared in the doorway to confer with the gate staff. Patricia kept glancing between the door and Maya, as if hoping the situation might resolve itself before security arrived. Inside her head, Maya replayed Robert's sentence. Some people just don't know their place. She could have responded in dozens of ways. She could have cut him down with facts, with titles, with numbers. She could have matched his volume. She could have made him small. But she knew that matching him would not teach anyone here the truth of what they had just seen. Lena's voice broke the quiet. "Viewers at 1,400 now. People are clipping this. They're saying they've seen this exact thing before." Robert ignored her. "Let's get this over with." Maya exhaled slowly, letting the air leave her lungs in a steady stream. She thought of the meeting she was flying to in Miami, the faces around the table, the decisions that would be made about investments and partnerships, decisions she could influence to change more than just numbers on a balance sheet. And she thought of this moment, in this narrow space, with this man who believed the seat was his because he had claimed it the loudest. Her choice was becoming clearer. Security would arrive soon. But before they did, she was going to make sure everyone in this cabin saw exactly what they were part of. She reached down and brushed her fingers across the leather of her portfolio, feeling the edge of the folder inside. Not yet, she told herself. One more moment, one more reveal at the right time. Robert shifted his weight, clearly impatient now. Unbelievable. This is why flights get grounded. Maya lifted her chin just slightly. "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. "Sometimes they do." The cabin had gone quiet, except for the hiss of the air vents and the soft rustle of people shifting in their seats. The tension was so thick it felt as though the air itself had weight. Captain Joel Ramirez stood over Maya Bennett's seat like a man trying to keep a lid on something he thought might boil over. His voice was low now, meant to sound measured, but every word carried the urgency of a clock ticking down. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "this is your last chance to cooperate. If you don't step out of the seat now, I will have to call for security to escort you off the aircraft." Robert Harlow was practically vibrating with satisfaction. His lips curved into the kind of smirk people wore when they believed they'd won long before the score was final. "Finally," he muttered. We can get this resolved and move on. Lena Park, still steady with her phone, angled the camera to capture Robert's expression. Her voice was quiet but firm. It's already resolved. She's been here the whole time. You just don't like the outcome. This isn't your business, Robert snapped without turning to her. It is when you're trying to humiliate someone in front of an entire cabin, Lena replied. Patricia Lang shifted awkwardly, her clipboard now hanging at her side. She had been in enough conflicts to know when a situation was no longer about the thing it claimed to be about. This wasn't about a duplicate boarding pass anymore. Robert's voice rose again. Look, Captain, I have meetings in Miami. Important ones. This seat was mine. I paid for it. I planned my trip around it. And she paid for hers, Lena said, nodding toward Maya. Joel's eyes flicked toward Lena for just a second before settling back on Maya. Ms. Bennett, he repeated, you need to gather your belongings. Maya looked down at her magazine, resting neatly on the armrest, then at her leather portfolio beneath the seat. Her hands remained still. Her body relaxed, but her mind was weighing the moment. She had given them every opportunity to see her as a paying passenger, deserving of the same respect as anyone else in this cabin. They had failed that test. Now it was time for another kind of lesson. She inhaled slowly and rose to her feet with measured grace. Robert stepped back just far enough to let her stand, but his smirk didn't fade. He glanced around the cabin as if inviting others to share in his victory. Lena's camera followed Maya's every move. The chat on her stream was flying faster than she could read it. Viewers were guessing what would happen next. Some were urging Maya to fight. Others were saying this was the part where the truth came out. Maya bent down, picked up her portfolio, and unzipped it with a smooth, unhurried motion. Inside was a single black folder, the kind used for official board meetings. She slid out one sheet of paper, crisp and heavy, with a letterhead embossed in deep blue. Captain Ramirez, she said, her tone calm and clear enough for everyone in the surrounding rows to hear. Before you call security, I think you should take a look at this. She held out the document. Joel hesitated, then took it. His eyes scanned the top of the page, moving quickly over the lines. First, there was a flicker of confusion, then recognition, and then the color drained from his face. His posture straightened so suddenly it looked like someone had pulled a string at his collar. This, he began, his voice catching. Ms. Bennett, I didn't realize. Patricia stepped closer, peering at the page over Joel's arm. Her lips parted slightly when she saw the letterhead. Oh my God. She breathed, almost to herself. Robert frowned. What is it? What's going on? Lena zoomed her camera, catching Joel's reaction and the edge of the document without revealing the details. The chat exploded. He just realized who she is. That's a power move. The captain looks like he's seen a ghost. Maya reached out and took the paper back, sliding it into her folder with the same deliberate calm. That, she said, settling back into her seat, is my credential as chairwoman of Bennett Capital Partners. The title hung in the air for a moment, a phrase most of the cabin didn't fully register until she added, Bennett Capital Partners owns 65% of Atlantic Sky Airlines. Robert's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence was broken only by a sharp intake of breath from the woman in 2D. That means, Maya continued evenly, this is my airline? All of your airline. Actually. She let her gaze sweep over the crew members standing in front of her. And I've been sitting here, quietly, watching how you handle a paying customer. Patricia's cheeks flushed. Ms. Bennett, I'm so sorry. I didn't. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, Maya said. Not unkindly, but with enough precision that the point landed hard. That's exactly the problem. The captain's eyes darted toward the other passengers, many of whom were still filming. His hands tightened on the clipboard. Ms. Bennett, I apologize. We all do. Robert finally found his voice, though it cracked when he spoke. You can't be serious. She's making this up. Do you think I'm lying? Maya asked, her voice calm as she looked directly at him. Robert hesitated. I don't know. Maya reached for her phone, tapped the screen twice, and held it out so he could see the contact list: CEO Atlantic Sky, VP Operations, Chief Financial Officer, all with direct numbers. Would you like me to call one of them right now? Robert took a half step back, his confidence evaporating. No, that's not necessary. Good, Maya said, placing her phone back on the armrest. Because what's necessary now is addressing the real issue here. She looked to Joel. Captain, what would you normally do to an employee who discriminated against your boss? Joel swallowed hard. We have a zero-tolerance policy. That kind of behavior would result in disciplinary action. Good to know, Maya replied. We'll discuss that in detail when we land. In the meantime, Mr. Harlow. She turned her gaze on Robert, who shifted uncomfortably under it. You assumed I didn't belong here. You tried to intimidate me. You delayed this flight. You made racist comments in front of witnesses. Robert's face was pale now. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you said, Maya interrupted. And actions have consequences. Lena's live stream viewer count shot past 3,000. The chat filled with applause, emojis and calls for accountability. Maya leaned back slightly. Captain, please make a note that Mr. Harlow will be banned from Atlantic Sky Airlines effective immediately. Robert's head snapped toward Joel. You can't. She can, Joel said quietly. And she just did. Maya reached for her magazine, opened it to where she had left off, and smoothed the page with one hand. Now, Captain, shall we prepare for departure? Joel cleared his throat, nodded, and stepped away. Patricia murmured another apology before retreating down the aisle. Robert remained standing for a moment longer before shuffling toward his seat in economy, his eyes fixed on the carpet. The cabin felt different now, the tension replaced by a charged kind of silence. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding at Maya, others still processing what they had witnessed. Lena ended her stream with a final shot of Maya calmly reading, the caption already forming in her mind. When you try to steal a seat from the woman who owns the airline. The engine's hum deepened as the crew prepared for pushback. Maya turned the page of her magazine, her expression serene, but in her mind, the real work was only beginning. The plane had not moved from the gate, but the energy inside business class had shifted like a current changing direction. The eyes that had been darting between Maya Bennett and Robert Harlow were now fixed squarely on Maya. Even those who had been pretending not to watch were leaning just slightly into the aisle. Drawn in despite themselves, Maya closed her folder with a soft snap and set it back into her portfolio. She placed the portfolio under the seat, slid her magazine back onto her lap, and crossed one leg over the other. Her composure was effortless, but the message was unmistakable. Let me be clear, Maya said, her voice carrying easily without needing to be raised. I am not in this seat because I own the airline. I am in this seat because I paid for it, like any other passenger. But today, I've been reminded that for some people, my presence here is still up for debate. Her words were measured, not hurried, but they landed with precision. A few passengers exchanged glances. Others stared down at their hands. Uncomfortable. Robert, still standing awkwardly in the aisle near row 6, tried to rally his footing. "Look, I didn't know." "That's exactly the point," Maya interrupted. "You didn't know, and you decided I didn't belong here. You used your voice, your presence, to try to push me out of this seat, and the crew was ready to follow your lead without asking the right questions." Patricia Lang's face flushed again. She started to speak, but Maya held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for solutions." Lena Park angled her phone so it caught both Maya and Robert in the frame. Her live stream chat exploded. "This is history. She's so calm but cutting him to pieces. This is how you do it." Maya turned toward Captain Joel Ramirez, who had remained a step back, but was still close enough to be part of the scene. "Captain, you were prepared to remove me from this flight. Without proof, I was in the wrong. You deferred to the loudest voice rather than the facts in front of you. That is a problem, and not just for me." Joel's jaw flexed. "You're right," he admitted, though the words were quiet. "I should have handled it differently." "You should have." Maya agreed. "And if I hadn't revealed who I am, I suspect the outcome would have been very different." There was a murmur in the cabin at that, a subtle shifting as people acknowledged the truth they'd just heard. Robert muttered something under his breath, but Lena's camera picked it up clearly. "She's making this about race now." Maya's gaze flicked toward him. "It's about race, because you made it about race the moment you decided I didn't belong. And it's about power, because you assumed yours outweighed mine, without knowing a thing about me." Lena lowered her phone slightly, taking in the moment with her own eyes rather than through the screen. She had seen confrontations before, but never one where the person on the receiving end held their ground with this kind of deliberate stillness. Maya stood, her posture commanding the attention of the entire cabin. "This is not the first time I've witnessed or experienced this kind of treatment on Atlantic sky flights, and I assure you, it will be the last time it goes unchecked." Robert's shoulders sagged. "I said I didn't know." "Exactly," Maya cut in again. "You didn't know, but you acted anyway. That's what bias looks like. It's not always shouting or slurs. Sometimes it's the quiet assumption that you're in the right and someone else is not, based solely on how they look." The silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't the tense silence of a brewing argument. It was the weighted silence of realization settling over a room. Maya looked at Patricia. "You will document this incident in full detail and send it directly to the Atlantic Sky Board. I will be expecting a copy." Patricia nodded quickly. "Yes, Ms. Bennett and Captain Ramirez," Maya continued. "We will be meeting in Miami with your senior management team to discuss immediate policy changes. That meeting will happen within the next 24 hours. "Yes, ma'am," Joel said. Lena's phone vibrated in her hand as the viewer count ticked past 4,000. The chat was wild now. People from across the country tagging news outlets, calling for headlines, demanding change. Maya returned to her seat, smoothing the crease in her blazer before picking up her magazine again. "Now," she said, her voice light but with a trace of steel beneath, "let's get this flight in the air. We've already lost enough time." Joel gave a short nod to Patricia, who turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane to coordinate departure. Robert remained in the aisle a moment longer, as if considering whether to say something else, but the weight of the eyes on him was too much. He turned and walked toward the back, escorted by a flight attendant. The engine's hum deepened as the aircraft prepared to push back. The boarding door closed with a solid thud, sealing the cabin from the terminal. Lena glanced at Maya. You didn't have to say all that, but I'm glad you did. Maya looked at her with a faint smile. Silence has its uses, but sometimes the right words at the right time can do more than any title or document. The plane began to roll slowly backward from the gate, outside the window. The ground crew moved with efficient precision, guiding the aircraft onto the taxiway. Inside, business class had settled into an uneasy quiet. Maya let her eyes drop back to her magazine. But she wasn't reading. She was thinking about how easily this could have gone another way, about the thousands of passengers without her resources or platform who had been pushed aside in moments just like this. She thought of them as the engines roared to life, carrying the plane toward the runway. This, she decided, was only the beginning. The aircraft leveled into the climb, the seatbelt sign still lit. But the atmosphere in business class was nothing like the usual polite quiet of an early flight. Every passenger in the first few rows had seen what just happened at the gate and during boarding. Phones were still in hands, some covertly recording, others typing furiously as if the world outside needed to know before the plane even reached cruising altitude. Maya Bennett sat in 3A with her magazine open but her eyes forward. She wasn't reading. She was listening to the sound of movement in the galley ahead. Hushed voices between crew members, the metallic clink of service trays, and a tone in those whispers that told her they were still rattled. She waited until the initial flurry of the climb subsided and the engine settled into a steady drone. Then she unbuckled her belt and stood, not abruptly, but with the slow certainty of someone who knew every eye in the room would follow her. Lena Park in 3B lowered her phone just enough to give Maya a questioning look. Maya glanced at her briefly and then stepped into the aisle. The movement drew the attention of the flight attendant stationed near the galley. "Ms. Bennett, can I get you something?" the attendant asked quickly, almost as if eager to make up for the earlier insult. Maya shook her head. "I need to speak with Captain Ramirez and the senior cabin crew. Now." The attendant nodded and slipped into the galley. Moments later, Patricia Lang and Captain Ramirez emerged, their expressions composed but taut. Behind them was Tanya Morales, the flight supervisor, who had joined mid-boarding when things were already tense but had hung back, observing. "Let's step into the galley," Maya said. The narrow space smelled faintly of brewed coffee and lemon sanitizer. It was cramped for 4 people, but that worked in her favor. There was no escaping eye contact here. Maya set her magazine down on the counter and folded her hands over it. "We're going to address this now, not later in Miami. What happened before takeoff is unacceptable, not just because it happened to me, but because it could happen to anyone who looks like me. And I can tell you, it already has, many times." Patricia's shoulders dipped. "Ms. Bennett, I don't apologize," Maya cut in. "I told you before, I'm here for solutions. That means real consequences and immediate changes." Captain Ramirez straightened slightly. "What do you want us to do, here and now?" "First," Maya said, "Mr. Harlow will not be flying on Atlantic sky again. Ever. Make the notation in the passenger conduct file and inform security to add him to the no-fly list. I will sign off on it myself when we land." The captain's brows lifted slightly. "We can do that." "Good. Second," Maya continued, "this incident will be documented in full detail, every decision made, every word spoken and sent directly to the board without being filtered through mid-level management. I want those reports on my desk within 48 hours. Tanya nodded quickly. "I can make sure that happens." "Third," Maya said, letting her gaze settle on Patricia, "you and every gate agent, flight attendant, and captain in this company will complete advanced unconscious bias training within the next 90 days. No exceptions. I'll be speaking to corporate HR about the implementation, and I expect full cooperation from flight crews." Patricia swallowed and nodded. "Yes, Ms. Bennett." "And fourth," Maya added, "this conversation we're having now, it's going to be public. Not in a way that humiliates you personally, but in a way that makes it clear to the public that Atlantic Sky does not tolerate discriminatory behavior and is taking action. That transparency will be our accountability." Joel exhaled slowly. Understood. Maya's tone softened slightly, but her gaze didn't waver. "You all have a choice. You can treat this as a one-time embarrassment and hope it fades from memory, or you can treat it as the turning point where we became the airline other carriers looked to as a model for fairness and dignity." "Which is it going to be?" Tanya answered first. "The turning point," Patricia followed, her voice quieter. "The turning point." Joel hesitated just a beat longer before nodding. "The turning point." Maya picked up her magazine from the counter. "Good. Let's make sure we act like it." She stepped back into the aisle and returned to her seat. Lena was watching her closely. "You just banned him, didn't you?" she asked in a low voice. "Yes," Maya replied simply, settling back into 3A. And that's just the start. The rest of business class had been silent during her brief absence, but whispers picked up now. A man in 2C leaned toward his seatmate. "That woman, she's not just a passenger." "You think his seatmate replied, 'I think we just saw the owner of the airline shut down a guy mid-flight.'" Lena's live stream had dipped while Maya was in the galley, but the moment she sat down, viewers began flooding back. "She's back," Lena said softly into the camera, "and things just got a lot more serious for that guy." Robert Harlow was nowhere in sight. He had been moved to the last row of economy, under the discreet but firm watch of a senior flight attendant. Word of his relocation had already spread through the cabin, passed in murmurs and glances. As the flight leveled at cruising altitude, Maya reopened her magazine. This time she actually began to read, though she was still aware of the eyes occasionally drifting her way. She was not here for their curiosity or approval. She was here because every person who had watched this unfold now carried the memory of what had been said and done and what had been corrected. Some lessons were best delivered in public view. Half an hour later, a flight attendant approached with a tray. "Ms. Bennett, would you care for a drink?" "Sparkling water, please," Maya said. The attendant set down a glass and then, almost hesitantly, added, "Thank you for how you handled that. I've seen things like that before, and I didn't always step in. I will next time." Maya looked at her and smiled faintly. "That's the point." She took a sip of the water, the bubbles crisp against her tongue. Outside the window, the clouds stretched endless and white, the sky above them a deep and steady blue. In the seat beside her, Lena was typing furiously into her phone, updating her viewers. The comments section was a flood of praise, outrage, and calls for reform. A few had already tagged major news outlets, predicting headlines before the wheels even touched Miami's runway. Maya didn't mind. In fact, she was counting on it. The cabin lights had dimmed slightly, the standard mid-cruise adjustment to help passengers relax. But relaxation was the last thing on anyone's mind in the forward galley of Atlantic Sky Flight 451. The hum of the engines was constant, but the energy in the room felt charged, like a meeting called during a crisis, which, in many ways, it was. Maya Bennett sat at the small fold-down jump seat in the galley, a place usually reserved for crew during takeoff and landing. Across from her stood Captain Joel Ramirez, Flight Supervisor Tanya Morales, and Gate Agent Patricia Lang. The galley smelled faintly of coffee and the warm bread rolls waiting for meal service. Maya rested her hands on her leather portfolio, her voice low but steady. "We have a little over an hour before we land in Miami. We're going to use this time wisely." The three crew members exchanged glances. Patricia still looked rattled, her cheeks flushed, her voice quiet. "Ms. Bennett, I know I made mistakes." Maya held up a hand. Acknowledging it is the first step. The next step is understanding why it happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Joel shifted on his feet. "You're talking about bias training?" "I'm talking about more than training," Maya said. "I'm talking about structural change. This morning, a white male passenger challenged my right to sit in a seat I paid for. The crew, without verifying the full facts, sided with him. That's not just a mistake. It's a symptom." Tanya's eyes flicked toward Patricia and then back to Maya. "A symptom of what?" "Of a culture where certain passengers are presumed right and others are presumed wrong, based on appearance," Maya said plainly. "It's not unique to Atlantic Sky, but we're going to make sure this airline is the one that fixes it." Patricia's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. "I didn't mean to—" "Intent doesn't erase impact," Maya said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Impact is what matters to the person experiencing it. If you treat a paying customer as though they don't belong, you've already caused harm regardless of your intention." Joel cleared his throat. "What do you propose?" Maya opened her portfolio and removed a thin stack of papers, each clipped neatly in a folder. "First, a direct reporting channel for discrimination complaints that bypasses middle management and goes straight to the executive board. No more filtering, no more 'we'll handle it internally and hope it goes away.'" Tanya nodded slowly. "That could work." "Second," Maya continued, "mandatory unconscious bias and conflict de-escalation training for all customer-facing employees. Not the 2-hour online module you click through and forget. I mean interactive, scenario-based training with measurable results." Patricia glanced at Joel. "That's going to be a lot of hours to coordinate." "Then we coordinate them," Maya said simply. "Third, every incident like this will be logged and reviewed quarterly by an independent auditor, with findings made public. Transparency is the only way to maintain accountability." Joel raised an eyebrow. "Public as in, customers will see the numbers." "Yes," Maya said. "If our numbers are bad, the public will know, and we'll fix them until they're good. If our numbers are good, the public will see we're leading the industry. Either way, we win by being honest." Tanya leaned forward slightly. "What about consequences for passengers like Mr. Harlow?" "They should be immediate and consistent," Maya replied. "A permanent ban for harassment or discrimination against crew or passengers. And that ban should be shared with the no-fly list that other airlines can access." Patricia hesitated. "That's going to make waves." "Good," Maya said. "Sometimes you need waves to change the tide." For a moment, the only sound was the faint beep from the galley's coffee machine. Joel broke the silence. "You've clearly been thinking about this for a while." Maya looked directly at him. "This isn't the first time I've tested our airline. I've flown unannounced before. I've sat in economy. I've sat in first class. I've watched how passengers are treated. This is the fourth time in less than a year I've seen bias influence how a situation is handled. The difference today is that you all know who I am." Patricia's eyes widened. "You mean you've been testing the system?" Maya finished for her. "And the system has failed too many times." Tanya leaned back against the counter, letting out a slow breath. I can't argue with that. Maya gathered the papers back into her portfolio. When we land, I expect a written incident report from each of you. Be honest, include every detail, even the uncomfortable ones. Those are the ones we learn from. Joel nodded. You'll have it. Oh, Maya stood, smoothing her blazer. Good. Now let's get back out there. The passengers need to see that this crew can finish this flight with professionalism. As she stepped back into the cabin, a few passengers glanced up. Some nodded at her, a silent acknowledgement of what they'd witnessed. She returned to 3A, sat down, and buckled her seatbelt. Lena Park looked at her, curiosity in her eyes. So, was that the part where you set the new rules? Not yet, Maya said, a small smile at the corner of her mouth. That was the part where I made sure they understood the rules were about to change. Lena grinned and turned her phone back toward her own face. Update for everyone watching. She's not done yet, not even close. The comments section exploded. Viewers speculated about what would happen when the plane landed. Some predicted a press conference. Others thought there would be immediate corporate action. A few simply wrote, I wish I had that kind of composure. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines fill her ears. She thought about the faces of the other passengers, some supportive, some embarrassed, some defensive. She thought about the crew in the galley, caught between policies they'd been taught and the reality of what had just unfolded. And she thought about all the times she had chosen silence before, knowing it was the smarter move in that moment, but feeling the weight of it long after. This time, she wasn't going to leave it at silence. This time, the change would be written into the company's DNA. Outside, the plane sliced through the bright blue sky. Inside, the owner of Atlantic Sky was drafting a new future, one conversation at a time. Maya had just leaned back in her seat, eyes closed for the first time since boarding, when her phone began to vibrate in her blazer pocket. She hesitated. Cell service at this altitude was unpredictable, but the caller ID made her sit up immediately. It read, Dock Commissioner's Office. She slid the phone out and glanced around. Lena was watching her with quiet curiosity, but didn't say a word. Maya turned slightly toward the window and answered in a low voice. This is Bennett. A crisp male voice came through, slightly muffled by the static of the in-flight connection. Ms. Bennett, this is Commissioner Daniels. I understand you're currently on Flight 451. That's correct, she said, her tone neutral. What's the nature of the call? We've been monitoring the incident reported from the gate and early boarding stages. Daniels said, It's already hitting social media hard. We have media inquiries coming in asking if the Department of Transportation will be investigating Atlantic Sky. Maya glanced sideways. Lena was still recording on her phone, but the camera was angled toward her own face now. Maya kept her voice even. I see. And what's your current position? Our position is that we need details from you directly before we decide on a formal investigation, Daniels said. Given your role as both the victim in this scenario and the majority owner of the airline, this is unusual. That's one word for it, Maya replied. Daniels paused. We also know that you've been quietly conducting unannounced flights for the past year to test bias in your operations. I have to ask, was this today's purpose? Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. Not intentionally, but it's proving useful. There was a moment of static. Then Daniel's voice came back clearer. If you're willing, we'd like to fold today's events into our broader study on bias in air travel. That means interviews with you, the crew, and the passenger in question. It would also mean releasing portions of your internal findings. Maya looked down at her portfolio resting against her thigh. I'll consider it. But I want to be very clear. My priority is fixing my airline. If cooperating with you helps that, then we can talk. We'll arrange to have a representative meet you at the gate in Miami, Daniels said. And Ms. Bennett, off the record, we've been waiting for someone in your position to make this stand publicly. Maya gave a faint, humorless smile. Then I hope you're ready for the noise that comes with it. The line went dead. She slipped her phone back into her pocket. Lena's eyes were on her immediately. That was big, Lena said quietly. Bigger than you think, Maya replied. She picked up her glass of water, took a sip, and let her mind work through the next steps. A public confrontation was one thing. A government-backed inquiry was another. Together, they could be the pressure needed to make lasting change, but only if she kept control of the narrative. Half an hour later, Tanya Morales approached. Ms. Bennett, we've got meal service ready for business class. Would you like yours now? Yes, thank you, Maya said. As Tanya set the tray down, she leaned closer. When we land, I'll need to be the first off the plane. No delays, no distractions. Can you make that happen? Tanya nodded. Absolutely. Maya cut into the small portion of grilled salmon on her plate but barely tasted it. Her mind was on Miami International Airport, picturing the inevitable crowd reporters, passengers with phones raised, possibly even protesters if the news cycle moved fast enough. She had been in high-pressure situations before, but this one was different. This wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't about profit margins. This was about dignity, hers and everyone else's who had been silenced or brushed aside. A voice from a few rows back broke her thoughts. I just don't see why she had to make it such a big deal. It was a man's voice, familiar. Robert Harlow. Maya didn't turn around, but she could hear him speaking to someone seated beside him. I mean, she got her seat, didn't she? And now the whole plane's wrapped around her finger. Lena raised an eyebrow at Maya, clearly having heard it too. You want me to say something? Maya said, her voice calm. Let him talk. Every word is a mirror. She refocused on her meal, letting the conversation behind her fade into the background. What mattered now wasn't convincing Robert of anything people like him rarely shifted in a single moment. What mattered was setting up a system where his kind of thinking had no power to harm. An hour before landing, Captain Ramirez's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Miami. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and your seat backs are in their upright position. Maya gathered her belongings portfolio, magazine, phone. She felt the subtle drop in altitude, the change in engine pitch. Through the small oval window, the clouds thinned, revealing the shimmer of the Atlantic and the edges of Miami's skyline. She glanced at Lena. When we land, stay close. Things are about to move quickly. Lena nodded, slipping her phone into her pocket, but keeping her hand near it, ready. The plane banked gently, lining up with the runway. The hum of anticipation in the cabin grew not just for arrival, but for whatever waited on the ground. Passengers whispered about what they'd witnessed, some already planning to post their own accounts online. Maya sat still, eyes forward, her breathing slow and steady. She knew the moment the door opened, control of the environment would be harder to maintain. But for now, in these final minutes of flight, she had the advantage of time to think and steel herself. She thought of the commissioner's words. We've been waiting for someone in your position to make this stand publicly. Yes, she thought, and once I do, there's no going back. The seatbelt sign chimed on again, and the plane began its final approach. The runway grew larger in the window until the wheels hit with a firm, decisive thump. The engines roared in reverse thrust, slowing the aircraft as the Miami terminal came into view. Maya looked down at her folded hands. This was it. Whatever happened next would set the tone not just for her airline, but for the entire industry. And she was ready. The plane rolled to a smooth stop at the gate, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. Passengers were leaning into the aisles, grabbing bags, whispering in hushed but excited tones. The air buzzed with anticipation, as though everyone could feel something significant was about to happen. Maya Bennett stayed seated in 3A, her seatbelt still fastened even after the familiar chime released the rest of the cabin. Her focus was on the front door, where the jet bridge would soon connect. She had asked Tanya Morales for a clean path off the plane, and from the way Tanya hovered by the galley, Maya knew the supervisor was ready. Lena Park leaned toward her. "You've got a crowd waiting out there. I saw it through the window when we taxied in." "How big?" Maya asked quietly. "Big enough to make this go viral in 10 minutes flat." Lena replied, "Cameras, reporters, even some passengers from other gates watching." Maya inhaled slowly. The moment she stepped into that terminal, the controlled environment of the airplane would disappear. The narrative could scatter, twist, and grow in ways she couldn't predict. But she had been preparing for this kind of chaos her entire career. A crackle came from the PA system. Captain Ramirez's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated momentarily to allow for a priority disembarkation. Thank you for your cooperation." The murmur of voices rose in curiosity. Maya could feel the shift passengers wondering who was so important they had to be let off first. Those who didn't already know were about to find out. The door opened with a metallic thunk. The scent of airport air, sterile and faintly coffee-laced, rushed in. Tanya stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett, we're ready for you." Maya stood, collected her portfolio, and stepped into the aisle. Every head in the first 3 rows turned toward her. A few passengers nodded in quiet support. Others watched with open curiosity. Robert Harlow, slouched in his economy seat, narrowed his eyes as she passed but said nothing. As she reached the doorway, she caught the first glimpse of the terminal beyond. Reporters clustered near the end of the jet bridge, their cameras already raised. A few security officers stood between them and the aircraft door. The moment Maya stepped onto the bridge, questions began flying. "Ms. Bennett, can you confirm you were asked to give up your seat for a white male passenger? Are you filing a discrimination complaint against your own airline? Is it true you're meeting with the Department of Transportation today?" Maya didn't stop walking. "I'll speak once we're in the terminal," she said evenly. Security escorted her through the jet bridge and into the gate area, where a semicircle of cameras and microphones waited. The crowd behind them, passengers. Curious onlookers watched in a mix of fascination and anticipation. She stopped just past the podium, normally used for boarding announcements. Tanya and Captain Ramirez flanked her at a respectful distance. Lena had somehow slipped into the front row of the crowd. Phone raised, but eyes on Maya. Maya placed her portfolio on the podium and spoke clearly, her voice carrying without a microphone. "This morning, a passenger attempted to have me removed from my assigned seat in business class. The gate agent and crew initially supported that request without verifying the facts. That decision was influenced by bias, unconscious or otherwise, and it was wrong." The crowd was utterly still. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts. "I am Maya Bennett," she continued. I am the majority owner of Atlantic Sky Airlines, and I want everyone here to understand, if this can happen to me, it can happen to any of you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I am not here to humiliate individuals," she said, glancing toward Patricia Lang, who stood at the edge of the group, looking pale, "but I am here to hold my company accountable. Today, we are implementing immediate steps to ensure that passengers are treated with fairness and dignity, regardless of race, gender, or any other factor." She outlined the policies she had discussed: mid-flight direct reporting to the board, mandatory scenario-based bias training, independent audits, and a shared no-fly list for discriminatory passengers. "This is not a press stunt," she said. "It is a systemic change, and it starts now." One reporter called out, "Ms. Bennett, will the passenger involved be banned from Atlantic Sky?" "Yes," Maya said without hesitation. "Effective immediately." Gasps and murmurs filled the air. Another reporter asked, "And the Department of Transportation?" "They've already contacted me," Maya replied. "I will be cooperating fully, and I expect Atlantic Sky to become the standard by which other airlines measure themselves." The crowd erupted with more questions, but Maya closed her portfolio. "That's all for now. The work begins." Security moved in to guide her toward a side exit. As she passed through the crowd, several passengers reached out not for photos, but for quick words of gratitude. "Thank you for speaking up. You just made me proud to fly this airline again. About time someone did something." She gave each a brief nod. In the private lounge upstairs, Commissioner Daniels was waiting. He stood as she entered, extending a hand. "You handled that well. Direct, calm, and impossible to spin against you." "That was the goal," Maya said, shaking his hand. "Are you ready to move forward with the investigation?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "and I want it to be thorough. If we find systemic bias, I'll make sure it's not just corrected here. It'll be a model for the industry." Daniels nodded. "Then let's get started." As they sat, Maya felt the weight of the morning begin to settle, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. She had turned an insult into a catalyst. Now the real work would test her resolve even more than the confrontation had. Outside, the Miami sun streamed through the lounge windows, illuminating the tarmac where the plane she had just stepped off was being serviced for its next flight. Somewhere in economy. Robert Harlow was probably telling anyone who would listen that he had been treated unfairly, but the truth was already out in the open, and it was larger than him now. Maya opened her portfolio and began outlining the first official steps. This was more than one passenger's bad behavior. It was a turning point, and she intended to make sure the tide never turned back. The private lounge had been cleared of everyone except Maya Bennett, Commissioner Daniels, and 2 aides from the Department of Transportation. A tray of untouched coffee sat on the side table, its steam fading in the bright afternoon light spilling through the windows. Outside, planes taxied lazily across the tarmac, oblivious to the kind of conversation that could reshape the industry they served. Daniels set a thick folder on the table between them. It landed with a soft thud, but the weight in that sound felt heavier than paper. "This," he said, resting his hand on the folder, "isn't just about what happened today. We've compiled accounts from the past 18 months involving Atlantic Sky and incidents flagged for potential bias. Passenger complaints, internal crew reports, even security footage in some cases." Maya sat still, her portfolio balanced on her lap. How many 17 documented incidents that align with the same pattern? Daniels replied, 9 of them happened in premium seating, 4 involved gateboarding conflicts, and in most of them, the passenger who was displaced or challenged was a person of color. Maya's gaze didn't waver. How many of those incidents resulted in corrective action? Daniel slid the folder toward her. That's where it gets complicated. In all but 2, the cases were closed without further investigation. Most were labeled as misunderstandings. A few were resolved with vouchers or apologies, but no structural changes. She opened the folder. The first page was a photo still from security footage, blurry, but clear enough to show a black woman standing at a boarding gate, visibly upset, speaking to a uniformed attendant. The caption read, "Passenger removed from seat 4B for reallocation to a white male frequent flyer." The next report described a Latino father traveling with his daughter, told at the gate that their upgraded seats had been accidentally double-booked. Both were reassigned to middle seats in economy, while the replacements 2 white businessmen were seated in the vacated premium spots. Maya read slowly, her jaw tightening with each line. She could feel the aides watching her, measuring her reaction. "I could say I'm shocked," she said at last, "but I'm not. I've seen parts of this firsthand. What I haven't seen until now is how deep it runs." Daniels leaned forward. "That's why your role here is so unusual. Most executives find out about these things from the outside. You experienced it from the inside. That gives you credibility if you choose to use it." "I will," she said, flipping to the next file. It was a report she hadn't known about 3 months ago. A black teenager in business class was told by a flight attendant that he must have boarded in the wrong section. The report ended with, "Passenger relocated to original seat after ID verification. Crew advised to be more careful in the future." Her hand stilled on the page. "Advised to be more careful," she said, almost to herself. "That's the equivalent of telling them to whisper next time." Daniel's expression hardened. "Exactly. And now we get to the most pressing question. What do you want to do about this?" "Maya." She closed the folder and sat back. "We fix it. Not quietly. Not internally. And not in a way that can be undone when leadership changes. This becomes part of Atlantic Sky's operational DNA. And I want oversight not just from my own board, but from you. You're inviting federal oversight into your own company." One of the aides asked, incredulous. "Yes," Maya said without hesitation. "Because if I'm serious about change, I can't be afraid of transparency." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That will set a precedent. Other airlines will resist it." "Good," Maya replied. "Let them resist. It'll only make them look worse when the numbers prove them wrong." The conversation shifted to logistics, how the audit process would work, the structure of reporting channels, timelines for implementing the training program. Maya was meticulous, asking pointed questions, writing quick notes in her portfolio. But even as the discussion flowed, part of her mind drifted to Robert Harlow. She knew men like him wouldn't see themselves in these reports. They would view today as an inconvenience, not a symptom. Changing the rules wouldn't change them, but it would strip away their influence in the spaces where they'd always assumed they belonged more than others. One aide opened a laptop and turned it toward her. "We also have raw footage from today's incident. Gate cameras, body cams, passenger recordings posted to social media. Would you like to review it?" Now Maya hesitated. She already knew what it would show: her own calm refusal to give up her seat, Robert's indignant tone, Patricia's uncertain siding with him. Seeing it again would not change her memory of the moment, but it might sharpen her resolve. "Play it," she said. The screen came alive with the familiar sight of Gate B-17. There she was, standing with her boarding pass extended. Robert loomed a step away, gesturing toward her seat assignment as if it were his by right. Patricia's voice came through faint but audible. "Mr. Harlow." Let's get you seated first, and then we'll sort this out. Maya felt the old heat rise in her chest. Not anger, something deeper, heavier. The quiet knowledge of how many times a variation of that moment had happened to others without an audience, without a camera, without the ability to push back. The video ended with her walking down the jet bridge, portfolio in hand, Robert glaring behind her. Daniels closed the laptop. This will be part of the official record. Maya stood, smoothing her blazer. Good. I want it to be. She looked out the window again, at the endless motion of the airport planes arriving, departing, ground crews moving like clockwork. The system was massive, but not untouchable. Daniels extended his hand again. We'll draft the memorandum of understanding tonight. Are you prepared for the backlash? I've been prepared for years, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I just needed the right moment to act. Today was that moment. As she left the lounge, she passed a bank of televisions in the terminal. Every screen was tuned to a news network, and there she was, stepping off Flight 401, speaking into the cameras. The Chiron read Atlantic Sky. CEO confronts bias in mid-flight standoff. Travelers in the seating area looked up at her, some with recognition, others with curiosity. One woman mouthed, "Thank you." As Maya walked by, she kept her pace steady. The evidence was now undeniable. The investigation underway. But she knew the final step would be the most critical, turning the findings into reforms that could not be undone. That battle was waiting for her in Part 12 of this fight, and she intended to win it. The conference room was silent, except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Maya Bennett sat at the head of the long table, a thick binder open in front of her. Across from her were the Department of Transportation officials, their expressions steady, prepared. To her right sat members of the Atlantic Sky Board, and to her left, a line of senior executives who looked like they'd been holding their breath since the meeting began. Commissioner Daniels cleared his throat and began. After a thorough review of incidents spanning the last 18 months, the DOT has determined that Atlantic Sky Airlines demonstrated a consistent pattern of unequal treatment toward passengers of color. While many of these incidents were dismissed internally as misunderstandings, the evidence shows that bias, both conscious and unconscious, was a determining factor in multiple seating and boarding disputes. No one moved. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Daniels continued, "The airline has agreed to a binding memorandum that will implement structural changes, including third-party oversight, mandatory scenario-based bias training for all staff, and quarterly audits. These measures will be monitored for compliance over a 5-year period." Maya's gaze traveled slowly down the table. "I want to be absolutely clear," she said. "This is not a temporary fix. This is the beginning of a permanent shift in how this airline treats people. We are setting the standard, and I expect everyone in this room to meet it." One board member, a silver-haired man named Arthur Blake, leaned forward. "Maya, these measures are costly. The audits alone." She cut him off with a look that stopped him cold. "The cost of doing nothing is higher. You want to talk numbers? Let's talk about the loss of trust, the lawsuits we'd face, the customers we'd never get back. You can't put a discount tag on dignity." A murmur of agreement passed among a few board members. Others stayed silent, calculating. Daniels closed his folder. "The DOT will issue its public statement in 1 hour. Ms. Bennett, the floor will be yours after that." When the officials left, the room seemed to exhale. Maya remained seated, flipping to a blank page in her binder. She began writing the points she wanted to make to the public, not just the facts, but the message. At the top of the page, she wrote, "This is bigger than one flight." 55 minutes later, she was standing behind a podium in the airline's main press hall. Cameras filled the space, their blinking lights reflecting in the polished floor. A wall of microphones bristled in front of her. The air was electric. This was the moment the narrative would crystallize, one way or another. She began calmly, her voice carrying with the steady confidence of someone who knew the weight of her words. Good afternoon. As you know, recent events have brought to light a series of unacceptable incidents within Atlantic Sky Airlines. Today, with the Department of Transportation, we are announcing a comprehensive plan to eliminate bias from every stage of the passenger experience. She spoke of the binding agreement, the oversight, the audits. She made it clear this was not a marketing initiative, but a systemic overhaul. Then she shifted, her tone deepening. Some will say this is an overreaction, that incidents like the one I experienced on Flight 451 are rare. To those people, I say this: if it can happen once, it can happen again. And if it can happen again, then it's not rare. It's a pattern. She paused, letting the silence stretch. When I was asked to give up my seat, it wasn't just about a chair on an airplane. It was about the quiet message that some people are seen as belonging more than others. That message ends here, not only for Atlantic Sky, but if I have anything to say about it for the entire airline industry. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Bennett, do you believe this will change how other airlines operate? Yes, she said without hesitation. Change doesn't start when everyone agrees it's necessary. It starts when one person refuses to accept the old way. If we can lead the way, others will have no choice but to follow or be left behind. Another reporter asked, "What about the passenger involved in your incident? Has he responded?" "I'm not concerned with his response," Maya said evenly. "I'm concerned with the system that allowed his request to be honored in the first place. That's where my energy belongs." When the questions ended, she stepped away from the podium to a low rumble of conversations and the rapid-fire clicks of cameras. Outside the press hall, employees lined the corridor, some offering nods of quiet respect, others unsure of how to approach her. In the executive suite later that afternoon, Tanya Morales knocked gently on her open door. "I thought you'd want to see this." She handed Maya a tablet. On the screen was a live social media feed, flooded with posts from passengers, aviation workers, and everyday travelers praising her stance. Hashtags like Fair Skies and Seat for All were trending worldwide. Maya scrolled slowly, absorbing the messages. She knew the praise would not be universal. Change never pleased everyone, but the momentum was real, and it was bigger than her. As the sun dipped low over the city, casting golden light across her office, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. She thought about the people in those reports, the woman in seat 4B, the father and daughter in the double-booked seats, the teenager questioned in business class. She thought about Lena Park, recording the moment that had started all this, and how that single act of witnessing had amplified the truth. Her phone buzzed with a message from Commissioner Daniels. Public response is strong. Other carriers are already calling to discuss similar programs. "This is working," Maya typed back only 2 words. It's starting." She closed her binder and looked out at the skyline. The work ahead would be relentless. The resistance would be loud. But she had turned an injustice into a movement, and she wasn't about to let it stall. Somewhere out there, another passenger was boarding another flight, unaware that the rules had just changed in their favor. That was enough for today. Tomorrow, she would make sure those rules stayed in place. Sometimes change begins not with shouting, but with quiet, unwavering resolve. Maya Bennett's seat was taken, but her dignity wasn't. And in standing her ground, she did more than reclaim her place. She forced an entire industry to look itself in the mirror. This isn't just a story about one woman on one flight. It's about every person who's been told subtly or blatantly that they don't belong. It's about refusing to shrink, about choosing action over silence. And it's a reminder that respect is not a luxury seat, it's a right. But it's also a love letter to the strength we find in each other, to those who witness injustice and speak up, to those who stand beside someone when it would be easier to look away. The fight against prejudice isn't over. Every story we tell, every voice that joins in, makes it harder for injustice to hide. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, made you proud, or made you think, don't let it end here, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that dignity always deserves a seat.